Descent Legends of the Dark. This is an app-enhanced cooperative adventure game in which you lead a party of heroes through different adventures and they're linked together so that the heroes will progress, will change over time, the plots of the story will develop and become more complicated, etc, etc, etc. So part of this lineage of Dungeons and Dragons kind of game, adventure role-playing games in a box, as we have had now for a couple of decades, including in earlier editions of Descent. Matter of fact, it was the second edition of Descent that I believe was either the first one or one of the first games to use an app as a dungeon master, basically to delegate those functions that were given to human beings in some earlier games, but also, to event tables and card decks and source books and adventure books in other games. So I played the game Solitaire. I didn't play the whole campaign, and I'll tell you more about that later. So I controlled two heroes, and I went through several scenarios. Another thing of notice is that, again, there is a large family of games of this kind by now, from Shadows of Brimstone, Gloomhaven, of course, roleplay adventures, the D&D board games, in the family of Castle Ravenloft, Wrath of Ashardalon. So there is competition. So it's not just a matter of is Descent Legends of the Dark a good game, but also how does it compare with its own competitors, including, its own progenitor, including Descent 2nd Edition. Another thing to mention is that this game is very expensive. I paid $180 for it in my friendly local game store. You can find it online for less, but I like to support my friendly local game store when I can. So, the question is, how does it compare to other games, and is it worth an unusually high investment of money? Well, the components do look pretty good, and you have to take into account the money must have taken them to program the app. Still, let's take a look at what you get. You get miniatures, and for many of you, this will be super important. They do look nice and very detailed, as you can see there. And mercifully for me, they are assembled. I don't have to glue my fingers together trying to build the miniatures, as this always happens when I play a new set of Shadows of Brimstone, for example. So very nice, very detailed, sometimes almost too nice for their own good. Like this character here, I like him very much. When he's on the board, it takes up a lot of room. It occupies other people's spaces. So when he turns around, hey, what's up, Brain? He turns around and he hits people. Booyah, on the way. So things like that. Very, very nice, though, overall. Also, I should have mentioned, I'm mentioning it now, that, of course, in this game, the story is super important, so I'm not going to give you any spoilers. I'm going to show you components that you see at the beginning of the game, pretty much as you open the box. Again, spending some time on the miniatures, because for some of you, this will be what makes the investment worth it. To me, it's not as much of a draw. I'm more of a gameplay kind of guy than a hobby kind of guy. Maybe you want to see this one a little bit better, so I'll take this out. The other ones, I think you can still see them well enough when they are in the mold. In the protector. So, to preserve you from spoilers, I made up a fake scenario. This is not a scenario that I've seen. Maybe I just guessed one that later will be available, but it gives you the idea of the kind of very elaborate game space that you can expect. So the game comes with the plastic miniatures that you saw, but then the landscape features are three-dimensional cardboard. For the price, I expected those to be in painted plastic also, or in gold or something like that. So you're gonna have to build the three-dimensional terrain features. You have double-sided tiles that you will use to create the terrain as the app dictates. And so when you start an adventure, you will just know the initial space where your heroes are. So maybe it's something like that. And then you click on the app and you interact with an area and it unlocks the falling archway. Now, it doesn't fall always. it unlocks another area. As you can see, you can have multiple levels, so you have these columns here that you will use to create different kinds of levels, which will look great on your Instagram profile as you publish the pictures, but they have very little function in terms of gameplay. The rules also say, oh, for minigame effects, just ignore that things happen at different levels. The biggest thing is that you can jump down from a higher level to a lower one, but you have to use a stairs or a game effect to climb up. But other than that, they really don't do much. And then you're stuff like, chests, tables, bookcases, the super cute bubbling cauldron. Again, good looking. If you are walking at the conference and you sit this on a table, you will want to sit and play it, and that's great because somebody else assembled it for you, set it up for you, etc, etc, etc. As you're playing the game, when you are starting the game, you're excited about gameplay, then a new area unlocks, and so you have to build up this elaborate diorama. You play a couple of turns, then another area unlocks, and you have to build up more. So definitely logistically, it interrupts gameplay to build these things. And then you don't know the direction. This is gonna grow, so you're gonna take down some areas to build up some other ones. So it's definitely, there's definitely a burden there. But again, if you enjoy the visual diorama, good for you. When it comes to gameplay itself, it's pretty simple because a lot is taken care of in the app. But the general idea is that each character will have a miniature on the board marking their position. Here's Lady Bryn, my favorite character, with this adorable helm. And again, also when she turns around, her friends are like to dodge because so they don't get hit by those decorations. Very practical, I'm sure. So, Lady Bryn, this is how you mark her position on the board, and this is the card of the hero, which is double-sided with different effects. And then you have the weapons. She starts with 2 weapons that are also double-sided. And there's an upgraded side, and you put the 2 cards representing 2 weapons so that the upgraded side face each other, so they're not visible, and then you place both in here. So you have basically this double-sided, upgradable weapon card, and whichever side is up represents the weapon that she's using right now, and they have different effects. Some enemies may be more vulnerable to one rather than the other. Here we have the number of movement points that she generates when she takes a maneuver action. Health, you keep track of that one here. When the health goes on to 0, the character is not dead yet. Rather, you click on the app to indicate that the character takes a wound, which will trigger other effects, and then you reset this one to 10. So going to 0 doesn't mean that you die, it means that your character takes a wound. Character takes a second wound is not good, and character takes a third wound, well, let's say that most likely the unspeakable happens then. The unthinkable happens there. And here we have the kind of die that the character rolls when performing certain actions. There are 3 kinds of dice with some icons that you recognize from previous Descent games, possibly. The star means, yay, success. The lightning bolt means a surge, so different characters will have different surge effects triggered by that same symbol. And then we have the little plus, which allows you to take fatigue in order to count the plus symbol as a success. To take fatigue, and this is a really good, really fun mechanic, you take these tokens here and you place them on cards that have the fatigue symbol in the bottom right corner. At the beginning of the game, you only have these 2. You may collect more later. And then you will use game effects to basically flip cards so they don't only say, oh, now she's switching from wielding the Warhammer to the sword, but you're also dumping the tokens. It refreshes that. And there may be other tokens that go there that have different effects that also trigger when you flip the card. Something I like a lot about these dice, you may notice there are no blank sides. I don't like in games to basically waste my turn or feel like my action doesn't do anything. And so you will always get something more, something better. But I like that every die roll gives you the feeling that your agency matters, that you're doing something. Of course, any tweaked in the app, I'm sure that the values and maybe a simple success doesn't do anything, but you always had the feeling that you're doing something. The idea of an uninterrupted agency to me is key in a good game, and this element is done well here. So what happens? Hero turn. During your hero, you take. You have 3 actions that you can take. One must be a maneuver, meaning you cannot take 3 actions that are not maneuvers. But one of your actions is a maneuver, which means, of course, you move on the board. I mean, what else would that be? Boop boop. Then there are those tokens that indicate, based on the app will tell you which side goes up and where they go, and they indicate different kinds of interactions. Monster may pop up, information that you acquire, different kind of things. But again, your actions will be to move on the board, of course. When monsters are there, you can use an action to fight. If your weapon is ranged, then don't get too close to the darn monster. If the weapon is not, then you get next to them and you fight. Other actions are, again, to flip a card, dropping the tokens that were on top of it, and then characters may have unique actions. But and also you spend the explore action to interact with the environment, in which case you simply use the app to see what the interaction corresponds to. But really, most of the game is moving and attacking, so very often it's like move once and attack twice, because that's what you gotta do. From time to time, move once, flip a card because this weapon is better, and attack, or move one, attack, then flip a card. To attack, simplicity itself, you will roll the kind of die that is indicated by the attack. Say, she always rolls that die when attacking. In the app, you will input what kind of weapon you are using. Then you will input the number of successes that you have after possible effects and modifiers apply. And then you see what happens. The app will tell you the number of successes, what that corresponds to, how many hits it gives on the opponent, if there are other effects to be resolved. And that's it. And that's how you resolve combat. Roll the die, input combat, then the kind of weapon, input the result, apply the effect. When the enemies activate, the app will tell you what they do. They will typically, as you can expect, move and attack. If they have melee attack, they'll come as close as possible. If they're a ranged weapon, they want to be at that range, not too close, yet close enough to throw stuff at you. Their attack is basically, the app will tell you how much damage it generates, and then you're rolling your own defense. So I like that idea, which I know from 4 Against Darkness, that only the heroes roll dice, because you're rolling your attacks and then you're rolling your defense. And rolling the defense means you're rolling the indicated die there. The characters, of course, will have other dice. Roll there, again, apply surges if they apply fatigue if that is the case, so you'll have a number of successes, and those successes will be subtracted from the default amount of damage that the app told you your character took. So, in short, your hero takes 3 actions, every hero takes 3 actions, then you click to start the darkness phase in which the monsters activate, and you will likely have to roll for defense. And that's pretty much it. You continue like this until you win the scenario or you lose the scenario. In between scenarios, you go to town where you can use the app to buy materials. So then you go to another store and use those materials to craft upgrades. Then you get to another store and they can attach the upgrade to your weapon. That section in town feels pretty much like a video game, much more than anything else. So, in general, however, this is how you play Descent Legends of the Dark. So there's this ancient Zen riddle that asks, when is an app-enhanced board game a video game burdened by material components instead. It's a traditional riddle. You may have heard it before. Before we address it, let's talk about some of these elements that we have here in the game. The game is a board game with a companion app. Nothing wrong with that. That is a presence in modern gaming. However, if you look at the rankings of Board Game Geek, you look at the top 100, very few of those board games have apps. So it's not like, oh my gosh, that's something we really need. Finally, this has elevated board gaming to the next level. It looks like it's something that most board gamers don't need, and I think most board games, or many board gamers, will find controversial. After all, it looks like we're really drawn to hobby gaming by the material quality of the experience. Many of us are trying to recover from digital fatigue, and so it just looks like, looking at the ranking, that the community doesn't need these apps too much. And there are cases where apps and game and material elements are integrated very well. I love the Unlock games, Chronicles of Crimes, I love those games. And even say Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition, I enjoyed very much. There is a level where a board game may cross over to the dark side and then become, again, an app game with material components. And we'll see why I think this is the case here. But talking about the app by itself, I didn't enjoy the way it was designed. I didn't enjoy using it, especially on my phone. And you may say, why didn't you use a tablet? Because I don't have one. I don't feel like I need to buy a tablet just to play this game. Also, the box said you need a companion app. Didn't say a tablet is strongly recommended. So based on what the publisher is telling me, I'm authorized to believe that I spend my money for this and I can use it with this thing because this one plays apps. That wasn't the case. The text was very small, very hard to read. I tried to enlarge it. Maybe I missed how to do it, but at the very least, that means it wasn't intuitive how to get the text bigger. And so it was really, really hard to read that Lilliputian text. When it comes to the interactions between my characters and the environment, I click on a character, I click on the interaction point that the character is exploring or investigating. That's not the case. Maybe they wanted to make it more visceral in that you have to touch, don't tap. If you tap a character, it opens a different page. You touch the character and then you drag the icon to the interaction point. However, on a small screen such as mine, as I was dragging it, then very often my finger would cover the interaction point entirely. So actually it looked like I was there, but I wasn't. I lift my finger and nothing has happened. So I need to try several times until my finger is really and exactly in the center of whatever it is I'm interacting with. So for the most trivial interactions where I just wanted to do, what I had to do is rotate the image, enlarge it, then drag the icon of the character and still miss it and still do it 2-3 times before. Very annoying, very, very annoying. Some things I liked in the app, the dialogues, they look like a Japanese visual novel with the characters, fading into the background, coming up when they're talking and then back. The visuals are very nice. The scenarios, some of the stories are also pretty interesting. They do feel different. They do feel quite different the way they're designed. With one complaint, don't split the party. That 50 years of role-playing should have told us, don't split the party, but sometimes the adventure forces you to split the party. But in general, I like the situations, I like the visuals, I did not like the interactions of the game. The story is fairly stereotypical, and I don't mind that, actually. When I play high fantasy, to me, it's about the archetypes, it's about the universal values, universal ideas. I don't mind at all that the story felt animated, populated by very familiar characters and very familiar situations. I don't mind that at all, but it's a subjective thing. For many of you, this would be a negative. Now, that's for the app. When it comes to the material components, they're gorgeous, they're beautiful. If you see pictures of them on Instagram, and I think maybe they invested on this gigantic material production precisely to remind you, hey, this is a board game, not a video game. But I think they did too much of a good thing here, because these beautiful components that create these very elaborate dioramas, They look amazing, especially, I guess, if you're seeing pictures of them on Instagram. But as you're playing the game and you're building up different sections of the board, they just become an obstacle. They just interrupt gameplay. Just, oh my gosh, I had to build this thing, double leveled, just to be able to play the next scene. And I'm there, and of course I also need to spend time to make sure that everything is organized so I can find where things are as I take down one part and I build another. If you're playing with other players, maybe that's not so much of a problem because you're sharing the burden. But the game is advertised as playable solo. That's why I bought it. That's how I played it, and I just got annoyed at building the scenery because it just became burdensome. And just an interruption to gameplay. So much so that after playing a couple of scenarios, I gave up on the material components. I played 2 more scenarios as an app game, basically, almost entirely as an app game. I neglected the miniatures, I neglected the scenery. I had the cards on my characters, the tokens, the dice, of course, the dials, and then I would simply, I know where the character is, I know where the character is, I know where the enemy is. In my mind, I'm spending a move to move next to the character. I resolve that melee attack. I'm told that the enemy moves, so I know I cannot resolve another melee attack because I don't have a lot of space there. I could usually tell it's going to take me 1 action to move next to that enemy, and so I just had the images in my head. And you're like, was that accurate and correct? Probably not. There are times where I attack melee and I shouldn't, but other times maybe I spent an extra action moving and I wouldn't have needed that. But the difference is that I would not have played those scenarios at all because I just got so tired of this complete uneven pace of build up, and then look at the phone to do so many interactions. And I moved there, and then I'm looking at the phone. Yeah, I moved there, and then I'm looking at the phone. This majestic component that may look great on social media felt unnecessary. To me, that's a pretty fatal mistake there. Actually, one thing about the characters and the story, something I also didn't like about the design of the campaign is that sometimes you have to use certain characters. So I leveled up a character, I'm very passionate about the character, and I can't use them because I have to use another one, and just the quest mandates that. And then the emotional connection between ourselves and the fantasy characters that we control is one of the biggest emotional drives towards the role-playing experience. So a board game that tries to replicate that really should never force you to use a different character from the one that you like, that you experience the world through their eyes, a character that you have been leveling up. That's just a weird take on role playing, and by now I thought I could take for granted that people know we love to be a certain character and to develop that character and to experience a fantasy world through their eyes. So what do we have here? We have some good things buried in all of these negative elements. I really like the core engine. I really like the core idea of the system of flipping cards, adding fatigue, and then your timing when you flip it to rejuvenate that card. But now there is a negative token, and flipping it now gives me a negative effect. Many interesting things are to like here. It's just that as I played the game, I wanted to experience the story, and there were these elements from the app and from the materials that were preventing me. I was hoping that I could enjoy this story with this core engine, and I just like, man, I wish the board was easier to set up. Man, I wish instead of dealing with the app, I just had a source book, an encounter book, go to encounter A23, and I was reading a paragraph instead of struggling with the mechanics. Again, I think there is a really nice core idea here that has been developed in ways that, to me, have made it very difficult to enjoy. Maybe you have a ginormous tablet, maybe you have friends that are really good at quickly building dioramas, and you'll enjoy with your group. For me, as a solitaire player using a phone, that was not an experience that I enjoyed. And I was under the impression that with my phone, a solitaire player was a member of the target audience. This game is much more expensive than average games that give you similar experiences, from Journey in Middle-earth, Gloomhaven, Shadows of Brimstone, role-player adventures. And so if it's more expensive, if it did just the same, that would already be not good. Because if it just the same kind of experience as its competitors, then I'll go for those. I have something similar at a lower price. To me, this works less well, a lot less well than those competitors, and so my experience or my assessment will have to be negative. Again, I don't often talk about price of games because different people will be able to afford different things, but I can tell that this is way above average within the hobby community, and I didn't find my experience with the game to be well above average. I find it to be rather below average. So I started very excited when I walked home from my friend the local game store with this big box under my arm, and I ended up basically playing it as the most expensive app phone that I ever played.